And so they're kind of like pairs or sets of words. I guess this is what we're going to talk about. So the first two words that are commonly misused are accept with an A, and then versus accept with an E. So accept with an A is usually used as a verb. And so what accept with an A means is to recognize or take on. So you could like accept an invitation. Oh, and I guess that's my example sentence. But I could say I recently accepted an invitation to my friend's birthday party. So that would be like taking on, like you're taking on the invitation. You're going to go to the party. So that's accept with an A. And then we've also got accept with an E. So when you see this form of accept, I want you to think contrast. So what it means is apart from, and again, like I said, that's contrast. My example sentence is, except for my mom, no one in my family cooks. So that's kind of contrasting. Your mom is the only person in the family who cooks. So this is, so that's like this type of accept with an E is when we're like contrasting. And I don't really have like a fun way to remember these two types. I guess I just kind of remember that accept with an E means contrast. That's just what I think about when we're talking about that form of accept. Okay, so moving on to the second pair. They're also like E and A words, but it's effect with an E versus effect with an A. So effect with an E is kind of like when we're talking about a noun. So I could say is the end result of something. And so my example, the effect of her time spent outside was a tan. So because she spent all that time outside, the end result is that she later had a tan. And then the second effect with an A is also used to talk about like a verb. So this effect is the action that influences. So I'll show you my example. The school board's decision on dress code will affect what the students can wear. So because the school board made a decision on dress code, that's going to influence their students, like how the students dress. Okay. Number 3 is fewer versus less. So when we use fewer, we're usually talking about like a specific number. I'm gonna search back for this one. Okay, so fewer is usually a specific number, and then you can think of it as something you can count. So I could say fewer people voted for the older politician than the young one. So although we don't know like exactly how many people voted for the older politician, if we did know, that would be like a specific number, something you could count. So in this case, we're going to want to use fewer. And then I'll show you when we use less. So less is non-measurable, you can't count it, and so we could say she liked the older politician less than the young one. So we can't really measure how much she likes the politician. If she likes one more than the other, that can't be measured. All right, number 4. Is than with an E versus than with an A. So when we talk about then with an E, that's usually in relation to time. So I could say she first baked the cookies, then frosted them. So we're talking about how she baked the cookies, and then after that she frosted them. So that's in relation to time, what she did first and then what she did next. And then than with an A is usually a comparison. So my example sentence is she likes Qdoba more than Chipotle. So we're talking about like which restaurant she likes more. Okay. So number 5 is actually a set of words, and we're going to talk about like the 3 types of to. So T-O, T-O-O, and then T-W-O. So the first one, T-O, is a preposition. And so normally or a lot of times it describes where. So in my example, I could say going to the beach is his favorite activity. Then I'm going to write the second type up here. So that's T-O-O. So when you see like this word T-O-O, I want you to think also. And a lot of times if you see it on the ACT, you can replace it with the word also. And so if it makes sense, you're going to know that this is the form of to that you want to use. And then we also use it when we're talking about like amount. So I could say his friends go to the beach with him too. And then I'll do my trick, replace it with also. So his friends go to the beach with him also. We're saying that like additionally, his friends are going to the beach with him. And then the last two, you guys all know. TWO is just a number. And so I'm not going to say an example sentence, but it's just like the number 2. So that was the last form of to. Okay, number 6. We're going to talk about its versus its. So one has an apostrophe and then the other doesn't. So IT apostrophe S actually is a contraction, so it translates to it is. So you could do that trick where you replace it with it is, and if it makes sense, you're going to want to use the it's with an apostrophe. So my sentence, it's easy to skip studying. So we could try our trick, replace it with it is. It is easy to skip studying, and so because that makes sense, we know that we want to use the form with the contraction, or with the apostrophe. And then my second type, without the apostrophe, so that indicates possession. And so it's showing ownership. So my sentence is the book is better than its cover suggests. So we use the word it's to show that the cover is belonging to the book, its possession.
Sorry to bother you.
Yeah, so this type of it's without the contraction is actually showing possession. And it's kind of weird because usually when we have like an apostrophe, like I'd say like Rachel's apostrophe S, that's showing possession. But when we're talking about it's, the one without the apostrophe shows possession. Okay. On to number 7. So 7 is farther versus further. So farther with an A kind of represents physical distance. And so I like to kind of think that farther has far in it. So So we're talking about a distance. And then I could say the baseball field is farther from my house than the school is. So because like there's a physical distance we're talking about, we're going to use farther. And then further doesn't really have the greatest definition. It is a degree or level. So because that's not the easiest to remember, I also kind of like to think of it as not distance. So farther is distance and further is not. So I could say the interviewer had no further questions for the man. So we're not talking about distance, so we're going to use further in the example. Okay. Number 8, I know we've talked about before. But it's like using could of versus could have. And then again, we could replace could with should or would. So the thing with these words is that of is never correct. And that's just, and people use it because when we're using the contraction like could have with an apostrophe VE, it sounds like the word of, but instead it actually translates to could have. And so using the word of after like could, should, or would is never correct. And have is always the correct answer. So if you see like a question like this asking about like could have or should have or would have on the ACT, that could be like a really easy point because of is never ever going to be correct. And that was all for that one. So we'll move on to the next pair or set. Okay, so alright, number 9 over here. But we're going to be talking about the 3 types of there. And then along with that, we're also going to be talking about the 2 types of your. So there, which is THERE, is when we're talking about location. So I could say my car is parked over there, and that's like location where my car is parked at. And then let me erase this. So the second type of there, which I'm going to pair with one of the yours. So THEIR and then YOUR. That is when we're talking about possession. So I could say Their or your favorite sport is baseball. The sport or the favorite sport belongs to you or they, them. And then the last type of there, which is the one with the apostrophe, THEY apostrophe RE, and then I'm going to pair that with the your with an apostrophe. Those translate to they are and you are. So I could say fair slash. There slash you're going on vacation. And then I could break that up to see if it makes sense. They are going on vacation, you are going on vacation. So because it fits in that sentence, we'll know that this is the type of there or your you would use in that situation. Okay. Number 10. Okay, this marker's kind of dying, so let me switch it out. Okay, number 10 is that versus which. So if you see the word that, it should usually have no commas paired along with it. And so that's because that after that usually comes like a defining clause. So I'll show you my example. The road that leads to their house is under construction. So the fact that the road is leading to their house is like important to the sentence. So we could say it's like a defining clause, and then we're not going to include any commas in that example. But the second part, which, is kind of like the opposite. So when you see which, you should usually see like commas along with it. And so that is because after which usually comes a non-defining clause. And so we're actually going to use the same example sentence, but okay. So the road which leads to their house is under construction. So even though we use the exact same sentence, this part which leads to their house, that part is non-essential to what we're talking about. It's not super important that the road is leading to their house. What the main idea of the sentence is that the road is under construction. So depending on like what you're talking about, what you want to emphasize, that can depend on whether you use that or which, and if you have commas or if you don't have commas. Okay. So for number 11, we're actually going to pair that and which up, and then we're going to talk about them versus who. So when we use that and which, we're usually talking about an inanimate object. And so I'm not going to write the example sentence again, but it would be the road that leads to their house is under construction. We're talking about the road which isn't like a human, it's not living, and so we use either that or which. So who were usually or is used with humans. So I could say my friend who loves to bake wants to open a cake shop. So because we're talking about my friend who's a human, we're going to use who instead of that or which. My friend who loves to bake wants to open a cake shop. Okay. Number 12 is who versus whom. So we use who when we're talking about the subject. And I could say who is the favorite to win Wimbledon? So a trick with these ones is that if you're talking about who versus whom, you can replace who with he or she. And so if it makes sense, you're going to want to use who. So in my example, I could say, she is the favorite to win Wimbledon. Okay, and since that made sense, we're going to want to use who in that example. And then we'll talk about whom. So we use whom when we're talking about the object. So my example, whom do you want to win Wimbledon? And then we can replace it. Our trick for that one is to replace it with him or her to see if it makes sense. So for this example sentence, we can't, if we replaced it with him do you want to win Wimbledon? That doesn't really make sense. So first we'd actually have to rewrite the sentence to say, you want whom to win Wimbledon? And then we could say you want him to win Wimbledon. And so since him or her fits in there, we should know we want to use whom in that situation. Okay, so two more. Uh, 13 is I versus me. So we use I when we're talking about the subject, or I could say like the person performing the action. So I could say it was I who answered the phone. So in this example, I is the subject, or I am the subject. And then when we talk about me, so me usually goes along with the object. And so I said that I is the person performing the action. Me is going to be like the person that the action is being done to. So we could say my mom asked me to help her with the laundry. So because like your mom is the subject and then me, you're the one being asked to help with the laundry, we're going to use me in that instance instead of I. Last pair is lay versus lie. So lay is going to be used when we're talking about an object. And so, yeah, okay, let me show you an example first. So she made sure to lay her heavy books down. So when we're talking about lay, I guess you can kind of think that the A in lay sounds like place. So we usually use lay when we're talking about like placing something somewhere. So that is when we'd use lay. She made sure to lay her books down. And then the object, we're laying down the heavy books. And then for lie, that's going to be an action. So I could say, I lie down for a nap every day. And then a way to kind of remember this one is that the lie, or the I in lie kind of sounds like recline. So you can think that when we're using lie, it's going to be like when we're reclining. So real quick, I'm going to draw a chart. About lay versus lie. Okay. Okay, so if we're talking about like lay and lie, lay we talked about is like goes with an object, and then lie was the action. So those are the present forms of both of those words. But then this is the kind of tricky part. So if we go like to the past tense, lay becomes laid, and then lie actually becomes lay. So yeah, the tricky part is remembering that like lie in the past tense actually becomes lay, so you can confuse that between like the present tense or the present form of lay when we're talking about an object. And then the last part we don't really use as much, but is like the past participle, so that's when we're talking about a completed action. So lay becomes had laid, and then lie becomes had laid. Okay, so I'd say the most important part to remember is like how to differentiate between if we're talking about like the past tense of lie or the present form of lay, because they are the same word, even when we're talking about like either an object or an action. Alright, so that was all the notes for today. We got through all 14 of the commonly misused words. And we're going to take a practice test real quick. So today we're finally going to finish the test we've been taking for like 6 weeks. So if you want to get out your ACT 10 practice test book, we are taking passage 5 of, I think it's test 2, I'm not sure. Okay, so it's on page 436 of this orange book. Oh, it says 5. Okay, 6. Test 6. Alright, so page 436 of the orange ACT 10 book. And then we're going to be doing passage 5, which is questions 61 through 75. It's about peat and ancient and modern fuel, if everyone sees that. So I'm going to be giving you 9 minutes to take the practice test, which is like our goal time for the ACT English passages. So if does anyone have any questions before we start? No? Okay, let me set my timer. And then your time starts now. Okay, that's time. So we're gonna go over these 15 questions quick. Okay, so 61 is C, 62 is G, 63 is C, 64 is F, 65 is B, 66 is J, 67 is B, 68 is J, 69 is C, 70 is G, 71 is D, 72 is F, 73 is C, 74 is F, and 75 is D. Does anyone need those repeated or any? John?
Repeat 70.
70 is G.
What was number one?
61
Oh,
is
yeah,
is C.
thank you.
Anyone else need any repeated?
61 is B.
You say 61?
Yeah.
That was C.
Okay.
Alright, so now does anyone have any questions?
74.
74. Okay. Okay, so 74, the correct answer was F. But the question says the writer wants to link the essay's opening and concluding sentences. Which of the following alternatives to the underlined portion most successfully achieves this effect? So F says that peat will surely remain a part of Irish culture for generations to come. G says the renewability of peat will surely make peat last as a power source for a long time to come. H says modern peat harvesting has greatly simplified the collection and utilization of peat. And then J says that peat is not as useful today as it was centuries ago. So the question says that the writer wants to link the essay's opening and concluding sentences. So if we look to the opening sentence, that first sentence, it says, for the country of Ireland, peat is an abundant and plentiful natural resource that has been heating stoves and homes since the 8th century. And so the reason that the answer choice is F is because F is the only one that mentions like the Irish culture, which kind of ties the beginning, how they're talking about the country of Ireland, to the end, how they will still use peat for like many generations to come. Okay, any other questions?
65.
65. Okay, 65 is B. That was the correct answer. And so basically it's asking which form of dry should we use. Either no change, so that was drier, which is what was in the text. B is drying. C is as dry, and then D is dry. So if you read the sentence, and so the correct one was B, I think I said, but that is drying. So if we read the sentence, even today, stacks of freshly dug peat can be seen drier in rural Irish villages. So when we read that sentence, we know that something is happening to like the peat, and that's like it's drying. And so the reason that it is drying is because that's the only one that represents like a process over time. If we say dry, it's like one and done. And then as dry wouldn't really fit. And then drier, that doesn't really represent how we're talking about the change of the peat drying over time. Oh, you have a question?
Yeah, 70.
70. Okay. Number 70 is G. And I was kind of confused on this one a little bit too. But what they said is the reason why it's G is that because if we use either F, where we talk that it's a machine called Harrow, H, a machine that they call Harrow, or then J, Harrow, the machine type used, what they said in the back of the book was that the context already indicates that Harrow is a machine, and so we don't need to repeat that again. I don't know, I don't think I would necessarily know that Harrow is a machine just by reading it, but that's how they explained it in the book, that we should tell that it's a machine by the context. Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, so that's all I have for today. Oh, and then another thing I forgot to mention, you guys can put your books away and stuff. But with the 14 misused words that we went over, I think something that really helped me was making flashcards. And so I'd like make flashcards between like fewer and less, or like than versus, or that versus which. And I think that really helped me on the ACT English portion, just because I kind of knew like the differences and which one I should be using. But other than that, I don't have anything else for you guys today. So you can pack up and go. If you're on the Zoom, you can leave. Thanks for coming, guys, and I'll see you next week.